we are going to kick off and see if anybody else joins. But welcome everyone to the next episode of the Monthly Sync. My name is Tash Evans and I'm VP of Customer Growth at a company called Hook, and I'm also your host today. Today we're talking all about the complex customers in the world of customer success. The fact that everything is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Not every customer looks and feels the same. And I'm joined by two incredible guests today, Rich and Lucy, and I'm going to pass over to them to introduce themselves. Lucy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tash. So I'm Lucy. I'm a senior CSM at G2, which is the B2B marketplace and review platform. I've been there for about 3.5 years, working in the commercial segment, so managing some of our larger, kind of more complex accounts in EMEA. And prior to that, I was a senior AE at Gartner, so I've spent the past kind of 5 or 6 years working with customers from all the way from pre-sale through to renewal and upsell.
Nice, thanks. And Rich?
Yeah, thanks, Tash. So Rich Cookson, I head up EMEA customer success for a company called Affinity. In a nutshell, we help companies find, manage, and grow deals, and we focus on the capital market space. Prior to Affinity, I was at Procore, where I was brought in to build the EMEA CS org from the ground up, and we grew that business from around $7 million to $50 million over about 4 or 5 years. And then prior to that was LinkedIn, where I was responsible for EMEA's largest global customers, ranging anywhere between like 200K and $20 million plus. So have experience in different types and size of customers, but predominantly within that enterprise and strat space.
Nice, thank you both. All right, so today is all about every customer looks and feels differently, and how do we handle that and how do we navigate that in customer success? Let's just start maybe with a bit of context in terms of like what different shapes and sizes can customers come in, and how do you guys think about that? Lucy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, in my role at G2, I kind of came into the commercial role, but there's been times where I've had to work with kind of SMB and mid-market accounts. And that's where I had a big realization that they definitely do not all have the same kind of approach or structure. There's plenty of accounts that we've got where they are, we have a parent account and there's multiple brands beneath that, some that we work with, some that we don't. And they can all operate completely differently, have their own ROI metrics or kind of ways of working. But also customers where we've got kind of one centralized POC who's really running everything and connecting us with the rest of the kind of team or segments that we need to be working with, versus companies where you have to do all of that work. You haven't got that person to rely on, so they've got a much more kind of decentralized approach there.
Nice. Rich, what about you?
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think if you look at the most complex accounts in my experience, there's typically like 3 things. So I think it's wide ranging if you think about the different sizes and profile of customers. But I think 3 things for the most complex accounts. They're often like multi-product. So at LinkedIn we had like 8, 9, 10 products and so many challenges, including like having a solid knowledge base around the products, and then 2, delivering a strategy that supports adoption across all of those products with different stakeholders. The second is multi-geo and country. So as we've all experienced, where there's product and investment all over the world, and in many cases, the majority of the revenue actually sits outside of the country or region that the CSM is in. And I think we'll talk about more as how we navigate that as we carry on the conversation. And then I think the third, something that we termed or coined at LinkedIn, was like centralized versus decentralized. So centralized, as Lucy mentioned, you've got like, could be like a $5 million customer, but you can engage with their exec team and really implement the strategy from top down, from A to B. Decentralized is where you have products all over the world, different regions and countries, but one team or country doesn't speak to the other. Yeah, they've got different use cases, different priorities. So the way you need to set up to navigate that internally to solve for a very decentralized business is provide that additional complexity.
And sometimes with decentralized businesses as well, the budget sits in different places too, right? It's not just the stakeholders and the product, it's like they may choose to buy separately from the rest of the organization, which I think adds an extra layer of complexity when it comes to like renewals and things like that.
Yeah,
I'm
definitely.
interested to know, so I think this is like a really good insight into all the different shapes and sizes. So we've got multi-product, we've got you've obviously got like bigger seats, smaller seats, multiple geos that you can use, different teams, different segments, parent-child, decentralized. When it comes to some of the more complex ones, like the centralized, decentralized, the parent-child piece that you mentioned, Lucy, would you, either as a CSM, Lucy, or for your team, Rich, would you encourage your team to, I don't know, is that noted on the system anywhere? Like when you're looking at your book of business, do you know who is centralized, who is decentralized, who is multi-product? Like how do you figure that out right now?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. Like we do a lot of account shifts each year just to kind of even things out. And I'll take on new accounts and that information isn't there. Like that's something you've got to work out. And I've realized during my time, particularly at G2, it's such an important question to ask when you start working with the customers, like how do they work, and making sure this is noted down. So something I do to kind of combat this is I use the relationship map on LinkedIn Sales Navigator just to have all of my POCs mapped out and like the structure. But then try and log internally for all of those POCs, like what are their goals and what are their metrics as well, so that I know what they each care about. So when I want to talk to them, I've got something that resonates. But I think it's not like for us and for customers I've worked with, I don't think there's a consistent way that people have tracked this. Products is somewhat easier because we can see that in the in the CRM. But again, like what is value and how they want to engage with us as a vendor can vary, even if we've got 3 business units working with us. And that is something that I think is missing because it's kind of anecdotal evidence.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I'd agree. It's rarely been captured in my experience, and I think that it does start at the pre-sales process. But I think on that first kickoff call with the customer, you need to have done your research and do your work. You need to map out the white space, and not the white space, but you need to map out the customer's organizational structure and who's who, and then come with a clear engagement plan. Validate that with the customer. Yeah, this is who goes where, as we have sort of differentiated engagements based on audience. And a couple of practical examples for that is if you're rolling out, you've got thousands of users all over the place and you're rolling out a change and enablement plan. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to do that one-to-one. You want to recommend, we think it's going to be these team leads or managers within different countries, these 6. These are the ones that are going to be, we're going to empower to drive things like curriculum and training and change management internally. These are the people that we recommend that we touch base with once a month for any Q&A, to track progress and to make sure that they have the latest resources at their disposal. And then if you think about QBRs, who are sort of the senior points of contact or the economic buyers. What is your recommendation if they're decentralized? Do we do 3 regional QBRs and 1 global? Is it just like if it's a very centralized business, is it this is the team that we want to run QBRs with, and be very clear on like this is the agenda, this is the purpose, who goes there. So I think in summary, it's like making sure that pre-sale, as part of the pre-sales process, you're really mapping out the organizational structure. And one of the key success criteria for any kickoff with the customer is aligning on that and nailing down who goes where as part of your yearly engagement strategy, and recommending that, but taking the customer's feedback and making tweaks.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm going to call out a couple of things from what the 2 of you have just said, because I think that they're awesome. And this is just the type of CS that I love. And I think that we all love. Both of you have talked about ask the customer how they want to operate, or build something and validate with the customer. And I think so often we see CS teams who are too afraid to ask that question, and they go down a rabbit hole because they haven't validated and they haven't thought bigger picture and they haven't pushed back on the customer or asked that question. And so I think it's really nice to hear both of you like talking about the type of CS that just takes control of a situation with a customer and really helps guide them down what's going to be best for them. And then Lucy, you also talked about something that was understanding what each stakeholder cares about and the metrics that matter to them, because value is in the eye of the beholder. And so I love what you talked about in terms of like really understanding what is value going to look like to this person and how do I talk to that when I speak to them. So Really, really great points so far.
Yeah. And also just something that Rich said about kind of coming with a plan and saying like these are the people that we're expecting to work with. I think that's such an important point, because working with account managers, I've seen calls where we've gone in and just said, oh, who's going to be responsible for this, or who should be managing this? And the response compared to when we say these are who we've mapped out and identified and like this is why we think they're important, you've got so much more buy-in from the customer at that point, when you've done your research, you've gone with a plan, and you're asking them to validate it rather than just like asking an open question.
Yeah,
because they must have that call with multiple different vendors, so you're not the only one asking that. So I think that's a really important point for CSMs.
Yeah, it's a good point, Lucy. And like, I've done this a million times as well. I've gone in and just asked the question without really researching them, having a plan. And they've said, the customer has gone, hey, it's like a 3 million decentralized business. And they've gone, hey, you just need to speak to us. Run the QBRs, we have the MSP, we try and drive that down internally. And then you've got all of these different teams and countries that don't care about one another, have different use cases and goals I mentioned before, and nothing happens. And then 6 months later, you go back to the drawing board, and then you're recommending the engagement. So doing discovery early doors and nailing that piece within the kickoff is probably the most important thing that you can ultimately lead with.
Yeah, I love that. And not giving people the opportunity to gatekeep, so that you don't get stuck with that one stakeholder, right? Okay, wonderful. And so, well, let's talk a bit more then about, based on all of these different like complexities of customers, how do we in customer success start to adapt our approach? So once we've identified that we've got a customer that maybe doesn't fit the mold or the shape of everybody else, how do we manage that? And I think you've both already started talking to the like stakeholder management, multi-threading piece. But what else comes under that approach? Or how else would you think about managing a customer differently based on them looking and feeling different to everybody else?
Yeah, I think like working with them. We have like our set ways of working, or ways of approaching accounts, and like MSPs that we should be filling out, but that definitely doesn't resonate with all customers, or it's not something that they necessarily want to engage with. And I've had examples of like high value customers that on the surface don't look that engaged, and they're not, responding to things, they're not coming on calls. But when we do talk with them, they're actually using the product really well, and they're deriving a lot of value from it. They just want a kind of hands-off approach. And I think, again, it comes back to kind of being afraid to not being afraid, sorry, to ask them how they want to work. And if they say, we don't want regular calls, we just want to do it like this, I think having some trust in that, but like whilst maintaining, there's certain things you are going to want to make sure you kind of keep in touch with them about, but finding your way of working and their way of working in like a middle ground between that, because I think if you just push your way of working on every customer, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there.
Yeah, I love that.
Great. I think you have to, it's important to find that balance, because I think, as we were talking about before, it's important that you have a strong recommendation, you're the experts, but then really listen to the customer and validate. And, to your question, Tash, I think if they are some of the largest customers, most important customers, I think that you think more broadly than like the standard engagement model. About you want to have QBRs and ops reviews and things like that. But if I'm thinking about like the largest strategic customer, I'm also thinking about like relationship touch points and cabs, and other key engagements. So really map that out more holistically through the course of the year, validate it with the customer, because you want as much high value engagement, relationship building, multi-threading as you can. So you need to make sure that the engagement model that you put forward with the customer and validate with the customer aligns to that.
Yeah. And again, it comes back to this like validation piece. And Lucy, I like what you said about like not just be your way of working, but their way of working too. And I've definitely, I'm sure everybody's been in the same boat, been guilty of turning up to a QBR and presenting global level data, and the customer being like, why are you showing me this? I only care about this one segment, or this particular team in my business, or this particular geo. And so I think that like asking the question and figuring out what they want and what they're going to get value from upfront is really important.
Yeah.
Rich, I'm interested. Oh, go for it.
Sorry, I was just going to add on to that, say like I think that comes back to the point we mentioned around knowing their metrics and what they care about. And as Rich said, like not, it might be multiple QBRs. So you might be saying, I'm going to have this team, I'm going to share these metrics, so I know what that they care about. but we're going to have to run through a series of 3 or 4 QBRs rather than just saying, I want everyone on one call, even though some of this is going to be irrelevant to a lot of you. So making sure you're tailoring it in that sense.
Yeah, love that. And then, so Rich, my next question was going to be directed to you. So as a leader, how do you think about the like resourcing component or the like infrastructure and the models that you put together for your CS team to run as you think about the fact that some customers are a lot more complex than others?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think when customers get much bigger and global, and there's seats and product all over the world. I touched on this before, but there's two. I often try and split the customers in two ways, right? You know, the first I mentioned before is centralized. It's top down. It's much easier, but depending on the size of the customer and the number of users, I've typically attached like a local CSM to that account team. And the main focus is going to be training and adoption within the region and really aligning to the strategy set in the MSP and by the global CSM. So if you think about like if you've got like a $5 million customer and like 1 million is in the US and 1 million is in APAC and you're managing out from EMEA, then you really need to transition to how companies typically map on Salesforce, which is one-to-one, to looking at through a customer lens and thinking about resourcing for the customer based on where they are and where their product sits. Yeah, and that's the big transition that we made on at LinkedIn. And I think decentralized is obviously more complex. It's something that we implemented at LinkedIn, and it really moved from like a beg, borrow, and steal model when we're all asking, "Hey, can you go and meet with my execs in Australia to go through A, B, and C?" And if you fast forward, we had like dedicated relays on the ground, building relationships and multi-threading. They're responsible for QBRs. As I mentioned, these businesses have like different priorities, use cases, and measures of success. And then I think importantly, you need to build the infrastructure to support this. So it's like working really closely with your revenue operations team to think about how you can attach local CSMs to revenue, define clear roles and responsibilities, empowering them with the insight. So if I'm a CSM based in India and I have 500K of the ARR in India, I can actually see what's going on from a usage and performance perspective to enable me to be proactive. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is provide like a joint up and consistent experience globally, to serve the customer. So that's one of the things that we did, really thinking through how we resource effectively for a global business.
Because at the end of the day, the customer doesn't really care, nor should they, about like how we're set up internally and where our team are based and how we attribute things on Salesforce. They care about getting the best possible experience. So I love that. You mentioned something there that like segues me through to my next question, which is around like usage and performance. I think one of the trickiest things about these complex customers, again, you've got like centralized versus decentralized, different geos, parent, child, multiple products. How do you, as a CSM, as a CS leader, get a good view of the health, the performance of some of these more complex customers?
Yeah. Look, I mean, we went through like a challenging scenario at LinkedIn. There, we basically had like a one health score and a one line of view for a customer that's spending like $15 million. And it really hit home when we had a customer that was like super green, but we churned about 400K. I think it was in India because they weren't using any of the seats, but they were super green. Yeah. And I realized at that point that one health score and one line of data is actually could be a hindrance and hides underperformance. So one of the things that we did is we got the team in the room, we got a whiteboard and said, what do you need to see? Yeah, forget the data, forget the dashboards that we have. What do you need to see? And where we got to is we started to break down all of these accounts by product or any investment. It could be ad spend, it could be seats, and then by things like the numbers, then the usage, performance metrics. So are they using it, but are they using them well? White space. And what that did is it took the blindfold off and enabled us to really see where there was opportunity or risk across accounts. And it enabled us to do two things. One, save a ton of churn because we're able to proactively reach out and speak to key stakeholders about issues that they weren't even aware of and address it and build a plan. Um, but then secondly, collaborate better internally. So if I'm a
Yeah.
global CSM and I have all of my local CSMs on the call, we're now having a data-driven discussion to say, look, the account's broadly in health. However, in Italy, yeah, they've got like 500K of jobs that they're using, but they're not using very well. They're not getting any ROI. Let's discuss like what the challenge is, like what is the call to action. So you're able to better orchestrate your global team and leverage the team in a way that best serves the customer. So I think you really need to look at beyond one health score and really be able to break it down by region, by country and team so that you can proactively identify and action any potential risk or opportunity across the account. And that's the main transition that we made after a lot of pain.
Yeah, I love that. And I agree with you completely. I think there's so much hidden risk in not being able to see how every product is performing. Like so many companies' health scores are built off of one core product, and they forget all of the extra products, they forget all of the add-ons, and it hides so much risk. Because if that one team or that one product goes and starts exploring competitors, all of a sudden your whole account can be at risk. Lucy, anything else that you've done in terms of how you view performance and how you view health to help you in your role?
Yeah, I think I definitely take our kind of health score with a pinch of salt, like very much kind of mirroring what Rich says. We look at something like how many integrations they've got turned on. So I might have an account with 7 integrations, but it turns out they're not actually using 5 of them. So I can come in, especially when you get new accounts, you can think, oh, they're really well adopted, everything looks good. But then you start talking to them and they say, oh no, the sales team have stopped using that tool, or it's on, but we haven't done anything with the data for months. So where I obviously manage a smaller number of accounts than I'm sure Rich is responsible for. I approach that and just having those one-to-one conversations to say, okay, this is turned on. What happens next? Like, what are the actual use cases and workflows that we're set up and kind of implementing on this? And then flagging this in our CRM. So we have our health score, but then we have a way to kind of override that to put our view in. But yeah, I'd love like a health score where it kind of weighted maybe like a CSM's gut feeling towards an account, or you could put some input metrics in from the customer. You could ask them like, what's your score for the account, and maybe that's something that you could put in. But I think a lot of clients do get lost behind the data. Like some look really unhealthy, they renew and they grow with you, and some look really healthy and then they churn or downgrade. So I think it's risky just relying on that.
Yeah,
It's interesting. Go for it.
I think it's just really important to work with really closely with your RevOps team and other teams, or look at different tech solutions out there. I don't think there's anything more important than health score. If you think about like CSMs, they're one of the most expensive assets within your business. And when you've got a terrible health score, they're using it as the North Star to ultimately prioritize their book of business. So get your health score right and understand it. And typically when you do it internally, and at Affinity, we've got the most amazing RevOps team. We do it ourselves internally. But it's often done. You need to make sure that CS is part of that conversation. So to Lucy's point, it's CSMs that know exactly what the makeup of a health score looks like, and how CSMs really want to deep digest and prioritize their book of business. So I don't think there's anything more important than getting that right, because it's how CSMs prioritize, engage, and be a lot more proactive. In terms of focusing in their efforts where they can make the most impact across their book.
And I think also it's for leaders too, like it's how you're betting your plan for the year for a CSM as well, right? It's not just how do I find risk, it's like, hey, my health score is informing my forecast. Here's what my forecast is. Here's what the difference is between my forecast and my target. Right. Here's how I'm going to go after it. And I think if none of that's right, then how can you feel good about the plan that you've got for the year ahead?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, wonderful conversation today. I'm going to try and summarize a little bit, and then we have a question sitting in the chat. And if anybody else has any questions, please throw them in the Q&A now. Customers come in all different shapes and sizes, and we have to adapt our approach accordingly. There's kind of 3 things that I've called out here that I think are in anyone's control. So Rich, I'm pulling your like thinking about how you resource just out of the equation. So for anyone that's listening, as we think about like what's in your control, you've got this like stakeholder management piece. Both of you talked a lot about like really understanding different stakeholders that are at play, who you need to have a relationship with, and building that upfront, not waiting till it's too late by being gatekept by one particular person. And then both of you talked a lot about this, like adapting your approach, like being okay with like not doing the same thing that you do on every other customer, and asking the customer what they need and how they want to work. And I think that's really important for the customers that just operate a little bit differently or are a little bit more complex. And then finally, we've got this performance piece, not just resting on your like, hey, one health score or one view of data for this one big complex customer, digging a layer deeper and seeing, okay, which teams or which geos or which products might be at risk or might not be performing as well that could help you. All right, we've got a question from Roman in the Q&A. Great content and ideas, thank you. How do you all think about the push for more CS productivity, i.e. CSMs scaling across more accounts and leveraging AI to help with relationships? Anyone want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we should do that. I think of it, it's the in terms of the AI piece, I think that most companies, I'm generalizing here, do a really good job of providing AI capabilities for their customers, but not enough internally. I would love to see more CS organizations, for instance, with Chat GPT or something similar, integrated across the whole tech stack. You weren't going through multiple silos, so you could really get the information you need, analyze the business in the way that you needed to. I think I think that we need to do a lot more of that within CS. And I think from a productivity piece, I think a big opportunity across companies is to really nail the scale effort. I think scale is a center of excellence. And I think if you nail this goes back to sort of data and understanding those triggers within the customer journey where a user may need help. I think you've got a huge opportunity to apply those across all segments. Yeah, so that CSMs, a strat CSM, can focus on much higher value activities, getting into customers, building relationships, working on the MSP. So I think that's a huge productivity play that all companies should be thinking about that isn't isolated to scale.
And it's an interesting question because as the world looks to how do we scale more in CS, how do we automate more, how do we leverage AI more, that doesn't necessarily gel with the biggest or the most complex or the ickiest customers where you've got all this different complexity in there. And so I think that there's so much gains to be had for scaling across your standard customer base. But when it comes to these more complex ones, it does feel a little bit harder and perhaps will take a little bit longer for the world to figure out. We've got one last question from Ross. How do you go about convincing internal stakeholders that a different approach is the best way to tackle a complex customer when you've been talking about scale? So how do you convince people internally that you need to take a different approach for some of these more complex customers when maybe the business is focused on scale?
Personally, I would say, if you've got evidence that it's not working so far, then I feel like that should be good enough buy-in to kind of showcase to your manager or VPs to say we need to take a different tack. So looking at maybe there might be a good health score, but I've heard from the customer they're not happy and they're not actually engaged or not getting ROI, so we have to try something new. And kind of using, maybe if you've got one use case where it has worked, and then saying, look, this is an instance where I've put this in place and it's worked, I'm going to roll this out across more customers.
Yeah, I love that. Rich, anything to add?
I know we're at time, but I think I agree, leverage the data and build the business case. So I think, for instance, having a really good, strong voice of customer program that captures NPS, that captures CSAT and all of these, and really getting close and both quantitative data and qualitative data, the customers will tell the story. So it's be very data driven, build the business case and help drive that change.
Yeah, awesome. All right, we are at time. So Rich, Lucy, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights today. And thank you to everybody else for joining. Please follow us on LinkedIn so you can see the next webinar that's coming up. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, guys.